Hello, my dear friends. Your journey to the past tonight doesn't begin on a battlefield or in an emperor's opulent throne room, but in a place far quieter and far more dangerous. You can almost smell it now, a dry, earthy scent, like old books and subtle perfume mixed with the dust of ages. When you think of ancient punishments, you imagine gleaming swords and grim-faced executioners. The truth, however, is that in the Song Dynasty, you are far more likely to be undone by a tired clerk with a slight tremor in his hand. You probably wouldn't even see the moment your life changed forever. You'd only smell it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Find that perfect spot. Let your head sink into your pillow and imagine you're standing in a dimly lit room, 1,000 years ago, surrounded by shelves of records that hold the fates of millions. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Close your eyes and breathe in. The air is thick, not with the metallic tang of fear or the cloying sweetness of incense burned for the gods, but with something far more mundane and, in its own way, far more absolute. It's the scent of ink. Imperial ink. This isn't the thin, chemical smell you might know from a modern pen. This is a complex fragrance, the very perfume of power in 11th century China. It's the smell of pine soot, painstakingly collected from burning resinous wood. It's fine black powder representing the distilled essence of 1,000 forests. It's the smell of animal glue, binding that soot together, giving it body and permanence. And woven through it all is a subtle, almost medicinal hint of camphor and musk, added not for luxury, but to preserve the ink sticks from insects and decay and to mask the faint, unpleasant odor of the glue. This scent clings to the wooden shelves that line the walls, rising from floor to ceiling. It has soaked into the dark, heavy wood of the desks and the simple robes of the men who sit at them. It's the smell of bureaucracy. History paints a glamorous, violent picture of imperial China. You imagine emperors draped in shimmering gold and silk, issuing life or death decrees with a flick of a wrist. You see grand palaces with curved eaves that kiss the clouds and hidden courtyards where intricate plots unfold, ending with a poisoned cup of wine or the flash of an assassin's blade. When you think of justice, you picture a stern magistrate in a high-backed chair, slamming a wooden gavel and sentencing a kneeling peasant to a swift, brutal fate. This is the illusion of the grand, dramatic opera of power. It's all about bold pronouncements and visible, awe-inspiring force. But let's pull back that silken curtain. The shocking reality is that you are not in a palace. You are in a yamen, a local government office, and the air here is stale. The light filtering through the paper lattice windows is hazy with dust motes dancing in the shafts of sun. And the true power in this room doesn't reside in a sword or a scepter, but in the glistening, wet tip of a brush held in a scholar's hand. The men here are not warriors. They are administrators, their fingers stained not with blood, but with that pervasive, pine-scented ink. They are the gears of a vast and intricate machine, and their quiet, rhythmic work is what truly governs the empire. The rustle of a silk sleeve as an arm moves across a scroll is louder than any voice. The soft, rhythmic scratch of a brush on paper is the only percussion. The most decisive sound is the solid thump of a carved wooden seal, coated in red paste, being pressed onto a finished document, making it official, making it real. And why? Why this obsession with paperwork? Why was the scent of ink more powerful than the scent of steel? Because the Song Dynasty was built on a foundation of profound distrust. After the glorious Tang Dynasty collapsed into chaos, followed by decades of fracturing and civil war, the Song emperors who reunited the land were terrified of one thing above all else: powerful, independent men. They feared ambitious generals who could command the loyalty of their armies and wealthy aristocrats who could challenge the throne. Their solution was revolutionary. They would build a government run not by warriors, but by scholars. They created the world's most sophisticated civil service examination system, recruiting the brightest minds from across the empire to become administrators. Power was thus centralized, abstracted, and laundered through paperwork. An order to move an army wasn't shouted on a battlefield. It was written, copied, sealed, and dispatched from a quiet office in the capital. A new tax wasn't imposed by a local lord's whim. It was a carefully worded edict, based on census data recorded on yet more scrolls, that trickled down through the layers of bureaucracy until it landed on your village. Your life, your property, your freedom, it all existed as an entry in a ledger somewhere. This was the genius, and the terror, of the Song system. They had created a government of paper, a kingdom of scrolls. Justice was no longer a passionate, personal affair. It was an administrative process. And every process begins with a form. Your entire existence could be altered, or even erased, by a single brushstroke. And as you stand in the quiet of this room, breathing in that dry, fragrant air, a shiver runs through you. You realize that somewhere, on one of these countless shelves, is a scroll with your name on it. And a clerk is reaching for a fresh brush. That brush, freshly dipped in the dark, fragrant ink we spoke of, now hovers over a new scroll. Your imagination, fed by stories and plays, prepares you for a scene of high drama. You expect the crash of a heavy door splintering, the roar of guards in lacquered armor shouting your name, accusing you of theft or treason in a voice that carries across the marketplace. You see yourself being seized, your arms twisted behind your back, the rough hands of the law a shocking violation. In this glamorous illusion, justice is a physical force, an immediate and terrifying confrontation. Your accuser points a finger, their face contorted with rage or righteous fury. The world shrinks to that single, electrifying moment of accusation, a public spectacle designed to awe and intimidate. But here, in the dusty quiet of the Yemen, that is not how it happens. The shocking reality is far more banal and infinitely more chilling. Pull your gaze away from the imaginary drama and look at the man standing meekly before the clerk's desk. He's your neighbor. He is not shouting. His hands are fidgeting with the hem of his tunic. He is complaining about you. Perhaps he claims you diverted water from his rice paddy. Or maybe he says your ox, the one with the crooked horn, trampled a section of his fence. It's a petty, everyday dispute. The clerk, a man named Peng with tired eyes and ink-stained knuckles, listens with a practiced patience that borders on boredom. He does not look at your neighbor. His gaze is fixed on the implements of his trade, the smooth, dark inkstone, the small ceramic pot of water, the stick of hardened pine soot ink. With a sigh that seems to carry the weight of 1,000 such complaints, Peng begins the ritual. He lets a few drops of water fall into the well of the inkstone. Then, he picks up the ink stick and begins to grind, his movements slow and circular. The sound is a soft, rhythmic shush shush shush, the only sound in the room besides the distant hum of the city. As he grinds, the water thickens, turning from grey to a deep, glossy black. The air fills with that familiar, earthy scent of power. This is not a prelude to violence. This is a prelude to paperwork. Once the ink is the perfect consistency, Peng picks up his brush, a simple shaft of bamboo with a tip of wolf hair. He straightens the scroll of coarse, yellowish paper, and then he begins to write. His brush moves with an impersonal grace. Your neighbor's rambling, emotional story is transformed. Your name, your family, your address, they become neat, precise characters on a grid. The alleged crime is stripped of its passion and rendered in the sterile, formal language of legal statutes. The complainant, Wang, of the 3rd District, reports that the accused, the ox with the crooked horn, is no longer a specific, familiar animal. It is now livestock, a legal category. The trampled fence is now property damage, its value to be assessed later. You are no longer a person. You have become a case file. The guard's shout never comes. Your fate is not sealed by a roar, but by Peng's weary sigh as he completes the final character and adds the date. The most terrifying part is the utter lack of malice. To Peng, you are not an enemy. You are not even a person. You are simply the subject of the day's next administrative task. And why this meticulous, almost glacial process? Why turn a heated argument between neighbors into a dry, bureaucratic report? The answer lies in the Song dynasty's deep-seated fear of instability. The founders of the dynasty had seen how personal grievances, amplified by corrupt or biased local officials, could spiral into vendettas, riots, and rebellions. Their solution was to create a system that was, in theory, impartial. By forcing every complaint through this paper-based filter, they sought to remove the human element of passion and prejudice. An oral accusation can be denied or misremembered. But a written document, bearing the date, the clerk's name, and an official stamp, is a fact. It has an objective reality. This system was designed to ensure that justice was slow, methodical, and, above all, predictable. The paper trail was everything. It protected the state from the whims of its own officials and protected officials from accusations of acting on their own authority. The integrity of the process was paramount. The scroll, once written, gained a life of its own. It was a formal cog, now inserted into the great machine of the law, and that machine must now turn. The clerk, paying, blows gently on the ink to dry it, the black characters gleaming wetly for a moment before dulling to a matte finish. He rolls the scroll, ties it with a piece of twine, and places it in a wooden tray destined for the magistrate's attention. The accusation is now official. It exists. It is real. And a piece of paper with this much official weight cannot simply sit in a tray. It demands a physical consequence, a tangible acknowledgement of its power. The first step of the legal process must be taken, not as a punishment, but as an administrative formality. With your case file now officially in existence, a summons is issued. 2 low-ranking runners from the Yemen arrive at your home. There is no violence, no shouting. They simply present you with the order. You are to report to the magistrate's office. As you walk through the familiar streets, you feel a new and unwelcome weight. It's not a physical weight yet, but the heavy gaze of your neighbours. Whispers follow you like a stray dog. You are now the accused. Your identity has been altered by that piece of paper. When you arrive at the government compound, you are not thrown into a dungeon. You are led to a holding area, an antechamber where you wait with a handful of other unlucky souls. The glamour of historical punishment would have you imagine yourself in chains, manacled to a damp stone wall, the air thick with the moans of the wretched. The reality is far more mundane, and in a way, more humiliating. The shocking reality is that the first instrument of your punishment is a tool of public shame, designed with all the bureaucratic precision of a tax ledger. It is the jeer, known to us as the kang. It is a large, heavy wooden board, formed from 2 pieces of seasoned wood that lock together around your neck. But this is not just a crude block of timber. Oh no. The Song legal codes are astonishingly specific about its construction. You can almost picture the committee of scholars in the capital, arguing not about justice, but about joinery. The wood must be dry and free of splinters. The dimensions are legally mandated, varying according to the severity of the alleged crime. A minor offence might warrant a kang of 15 jin, about 20 pounds. A more serious charge could mean a kang of 25 jin, weighing over 30 pounds. It's not just a punishment. It's a carefully calibrated instrument of social control. The clerk, perhaps a cousin of the one who wrote your initial complaint, consults a thick book of regulations. He runs his finger down a column of characters. He squints. Property damage, value less than 1 string of cash, farm animal involved, initial hearing. He nods to himself and calls out a number. A runner disappears into a storage room and returns with the appropriate kang. It's a medium-sized one, 20 pounds of solid, unyielding wood. The 2 pieces are fitted around your neck, and a wooden peg is hammered into place to lock it. The weight is immediate and awkward. It forces your shoulders down and your head up. You can no longer look at your own feet. You are forced to meet the eyes of everyone you see. But the true genius, true bureaucratic cruelty of the kang is not just its weight. Written on the board itself, in clear, black characters, is your sentence. Except it isn't a sentence yet. It is your accusation, your name, your address, and the specific complaint lodged against you, accused of allowing his ox to damage the fence of his neighbour, Wang. The kang is not just a restraint, it is a walking billboard. It is a mobile version of the paper scroll that started this whole mess. Your private dispute is now public information, worn around your neck for all to see. Children point. Merchants stop to read the inscription, some with pity, some with scorn. You have become a piece of living paperwork. Why this strange, theatrical display? Why not just lock you in a cell until the magistrate is ready? The answer is twofold. First, it was a practical matter of resource management. Jails were unpleasant, expensive, and overcrowded. It was far cheaper and easier for the state to make you responsible for your own confinement. While wearing the kang, you are often allowed to return home, or are billeted in a specific inn at your own expense. The state doesn't have to feed you or guard you. The sheer weight and awkwardness of the device, combined with the public humiliation, is your jailer. But more importantly, the kang served the deeper Confucian philosophy that underpinned the Song legal system. The ideal was not just to punish a crime, but to correct behavior and reinforce social harmony. The shame of wearing the kang was considered a powerful corrective force. It was believed that by forcing you to endure the judgment of your community, you would feel remorse and be deterred from future transgressions. It was a punishment aimed not at the body, but at your social standing, at your face. So you stand there, the rough wood chafing your neck, the weight a constant, dull ache in your shoulders and back. It is not the sharp, terrifying pain of a whip, but a grinding, soul-crushing exhaustion. Every person who stops to read the characters on your wooden prison is a reminder of your diminished status. You are no longer just a farmer. You are a public problem, a walking administrative file. The weight you feel is not just the 20 pounds of wood. It is the calculated, administrative weight of shame. The system hasn't broken your bones, but it is trying to break your spirit, to make you compliant. And as the day wears on, the sheer physical and mental exhaustion begins to work. You find yourself thinking that you would do almost anything to get this thing off your neck. And the system, in its bureaucratic wisdom, has an answer for that, too. The Khmer around your neck has done its work. The public shame, the constant, grinding weight, the sleepless nights trying to find a position that doesn't strain your spine, it has all softened you up. You are no longer defiant, just bone-weary and desperate for this ordeal to end. Your case finally comes before the local magistrate. The glamorous illusion of a courtroom drama would have you imagine a tense confrontation, a brilliant defense, a passionate plea for mercy. You might picture yourself arguing your case, calling witnesses, exposing your neighbor's lies in a stunning Perry Mason moment. The magistrate, a wise and discerning figure, would listen intently, weigh the evidence, and deliver a just and equitable verdict. But as you are led into the hall of justice, you realize this is not a stage for oratory. The shocking reality is that it feels more like an accounting office. The magistrate sits behind a wide desk, but his attention is not on you. It is on the pile of scrolls before him. Your case file, one started by the weary clerk, penges on top. He reads it, his brow furrowed in concentration. He is not looking for truth, he is looking for procedural correctness. Was the complaint filed correctly? Is the accusation aligned with the relevant statute? Is the paperwork in order? The primary goal is not to uncover the absolute truth of the trampled fence, a task he knows is likely impossible. His goal is to resolve the case in a way that is efficient, legally sound, and, most importantly, won't be overturned by a superior, creating a black mark on his own career record. The magistrate finally looks at you. He asks a few perfunctory questions. You try to explain your side of the story, but your words feel small and insignificant in the cavernous room. Your neighbor tells his version. The magistrate sighs. This is a he said situation, a messy and time-consuming affair to adjudicate fully. He has dozens of other, more important cases waiting. He needs to clear the docket. He declares his judgment, a minor offence, to be punished by the lightest beating, a sentence of 10 strokes with the light bamboo. A shiver of fear runs through you. You picture yourself stripped and held down, the whistling sound of the cane, the sharp, stinging pain. And then comes the part that truly reveals the soul of Song Dynasty justice. The magistrate, without changing his tone, makes another pronouncement. The sentence may be commuted, he says, his eyes already drifting to the next scroll on his desk, upon payment of a fine. This is the system of shu, or redemption. It is the moment where the illusion of justice as a moral force collides with the reality of justice as a financial transaction. The clerk consults another thick ledger. He cross-references the crime minor property damage with the punishment 10 strokes of the light bamboo. He runs his finger across a table of figures. For 10 strokes, the clerk announces, the redemption fee is 1 string of 1,000 copper coins. Why this bizarre system? Why pronounce a sentence of physical punishment only to immediately offer a cash-based alternative? It seems cynical, a way for the state to make money from its citizens' misdeeds. And while revenue was certainly a welcome side effect, the core reason was, once again, administrative. The Song legal system was obsessed with standardization and precedent. The ancient legal codes, inherited from the Tang dynasty, prescribed specific physical punishments for specific crimes. To maintain the integrity of this hallowed legal tradition, the magistrate had to sentence you to a beating. The law demanded it. However, the pragmatic Song administrators also recognized that flogging every minor offender was impractical, created public spectacles, and could cause injuries that would make a peasant unable to work and pay his taxes. The system of redemption was their elegant, bureaucratic solution. It allowed them to uphold the letter of the ancient law while implementing a more practical, modern punishment. It satisfied the ancestors and the accountants at the same time. Your family, having anticipated this, scrambles to produce the money. It is a significant sum. Perhaps a month's earnings. The copper coins. with their square holes in the center, are threaded onto a piece of hemp rope. They are counted and recounted by the clerk, the clinking sound echoing in the quiet hall. He makes a new entry in his ledger. He takes out a brush and, on your original case file, he writes the annotation, sentence of 10 strokes commuted via payment. He then takes the red seal of the Yemen and stamps the document. Thump. It is done. You are not beaten. You are not imprisoned. You are simply poorer. The state's honor has been satisfied. The books are balanced. The case is closed. You are free to go, the ache in your shoulders from the Khmer fading memory, replaced by the hollow feeling in your purse. You haven't received mercy. You have completed a transaction. You walk out into the sunlight, not righteous or vindicated, but simply processed. The system has no interest in your guilt or innocence, only in your compliance. And for some, whose crimes are more serious, a simple payment isn't enough. For them, the ink of the state will leave a far more permanent mark. You have escaped a beating through a carefully calculated payment, your encounter with the law reduced to a line item in a government ledger. You feel a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. The system, you realize, is less about morality and more about management. For more serious crimes, however, or for those who are repeat offenders, the state requires a more lasting and visible form of documentation. The glamorous illusion of criminal justice often involves a dramatic branding, a searing hot iron hissing as it presses a single, shameful letter onto a forehead or cheek, a mark of pure, animalistic ownership. It's a moment of fiery, agonizing pain, a barbaric sign for all to see. But this, too, is a simplification. The shocking reality in the Song dynasty was a procedure that was less about fiery rage and more about clerical precision. For certain classes of criminals, the punishment was not a brand, but a tattoo. This practice, known as sipi, was not a moment of passionate violence, but a state-mandated clerical task performed with a needle and that same familiar, pervasive ink. The tattoo was not a simple, crude mark. It was a set of characters, carefully inked onto the face, that conveyed specific information. It was, in effect, a permanent, state-issued identification card that you could never lose. Imagine a man convicted of robbery. He is held down, but the tool used on him is not a glowing poker. It is a sharp needle, perhaps several bundled together. A grim-faced functionary, who might be a prison guard or a specialized clerk, dips the needle into a pot of that same pine soot and glue ink you smelled in the Yemen office. Then, with a practiced hand, he begins to prick the skin of the man's cheek or forehead, meticulously forming the characters. The process is painful, 1,000 tiny stabs, but it is a controlled, deliberate pain. The characters are not random symbols of shame. They are coded information. They might read, for example, robbery, prefecture of Kaifeng. For soldiers who deserted, the tattoo would record their former unit and the nature of their offense. The tattoo's size, its exact wording, and its placement on the cheek for lesser crimes, on the forehead for more severe ones, are all specified in the legal codes. It was a human filing system. And why this specific, bizarre form of punishment? Why turn a man's face into a government form? The reasoning was, as always, rooted in the Song dynasty's obsession with control and administration. In a vast empire with a highly mobile population, keeping track of people was a monumental challenge. There were no photographs, no fingerprint databases. A criminal banished from one prefecture could easily travel to another and start a new life under a new name. The facial tattoo was the state's ingenious and brutal solution to this problem. It made the criminal's record instantly and permanently legible to any literate person. A government official, a potential employer, or even a wary innkeeper could read a man's face and know his history. It was the ultimate form of social control, tying a person's identity forever to their crime. Furthermore, this practice helped the government manage its vast and often troublesome army. The Song military was enormous, composed largely of conscripts, pardoned criminals, and the desperate poor. Desertion was rampant. By tattooing a soldier's face with his unit designation, the state made it nearly impossible for him to blend back into civilian life. If he was caught, his face was an open and shut case file. It also created a visible and permanent underclass of military households, whose sons were often expected to follow them into service. The tattoo was not just a punishment for the individual, it was a way of marking and managing entire families for generations. So, you see, the facial tattoo was not a mark of savage rage. It was a mark of cold, calculated bureaucracy. It was the logical endpoint of a system that began with a clerk grinding an ink stick. The same ink that recorded a complaint on a paper scroll was now used to record a conviction on a human face. The information was simply transferred from a temporary, perishable medium to a permanent, living one. The man with the freshly inked face is now a walking document. He is legible. He is categorized. He can be tracked and managed. His identity is no longer his own. It has been overwritten by the state. And for many like him, this permanent mark was only the beginning. It was the credential that qualified them for the next stage of the administrative process, a carefully managed journey far, far away from home. The man with the freshly tattooed face, his skin still tender and swollen, represents a problem for the local magistrate. His case is closed, his punishment recorded, but his physical presence is now a liability. He is a walking, talking piece of evidence that the system has produced a criminal. For such individuals or for disgraced officials who have fallen afoul of the emperor, the solution is not imprisonment, but removal. Your imagination, steeped in epic tales, pictures exile as a dramatic and desolate fate. You see a lonely figure, silhouetted against a setting sun, trudging through a barren wasteland towards a remote, forgotten frontier. It's a punishment of isolation and despair, a romantic and tragic journey into the wild. The shocking reality of exile in the Song dynasty, known as Pili, was far more bureaucratic and far less romantic. It was not a journey into the unknown, but a highly regulated administrative transfer from one government office to another. Your destination was not determined by the dramatic whim of a judge, but by a cold calculation based on a matrix of factors laid out in the legal codes. Your fate was decided by a clerk with a map and a set of rules. Look again at the Yemen office. The magistrate has pronounced the sentence, banishment. But that is just the beginning of the paperwork. A clerk, once again our friend Peng or someone very much like him, unrolls a large map of the Song Empire. He also consults the convicted man's file. The law was incredibly specific. The distance of the exile was determined by the severity of the crime. A lesser offence might mean banishment to a neighbouring prefecture, a mere 500 li about 150 miles away. A more serious crime could warrant exile to 1,000 li, or even 2,000 li. The most dangerous criminals and political enemies were sent to the malaria-infested southern island of Hainan, a place so remote and inhospitable it was considered a death sentence. But it wasn't just distance. The type of exile also varied. There was simple banishment, where you were just required to live within the new jurisdiction. There was a harsher version where you were sentenced to forced labour in the destination prefecture, often in a government-run workshop or mine. And for the tattooed criminals we just met, there was a special category, exile to a specific, often remote, military garrison, where they would serve as soldiers for the rest of their lives. The clerk would cross-reference the crime, the prescribed distance, and the type of banishment. He would then look at the map, tracing routes with his ink-stained finger. He wasn't plotting a journey of suffering. He was solving a logistical problem. The law requires 1,000 li and assignment to a military garrison, he might mutter. The garrison at Gashu is 1,100 li distant and is currently undermanned. The route via the Grand Canal is most efficient. And why this obsession with turning exile into a bureaucratic transfer? The answer, again, lies in the Song government's dual imperatives, maintaining control and managing resources. By exiling criminals to specific locations, especially military outposts, the state could turn a problem into a solution. The restive, unemployed, or criminal elements of the prosperous central heartlands were shipped out to the frontiers, where they were forced to become defenders of the empire against threats from the north and west. It was a brilliant, if ruthless, piece of social engineering. The system also ensured that the exile remained under government supervision. Upon arrival at his destination, the exiled man had to check in at the local Yemen. He was, in essence, a package being mailed from one bureaucrat to another. His facial tattoo, that permanent ID card, ensured he couldn't get lost in transit. He was tracked, managed, and utilized, even in his punishment. The journey itself was not a lonely trek. The exiled person was often escorted by Yemen runners, not just to prevent escape, but to ensure they reached the correct destination and their paperwork was handed over properly. The runners carried a travel order, a scroll that had to be stamped at official checkpoints along the way, proving they were following the designated route. The entire process was a moving paper trail. The man, with the tattooed face, is not stumbling into the wilderness. He is part of a convoy. He is an administrative asset being relocated. His punishment is not the wildness of nature, but the unceasing, inescapable grid of government control. He has not escaped the system. He has simply been moved to a different square on its vast board. And just as the destination of his exile was meticulously planned, so too was the pain of the lesser punishments he might have hoped to receive instead. Let us leave our tattooed exile on his state-managed journey and rewind to the moment of sentencing in the magistrate's court. Not everyone was banished or forced to redeem their sentence with cash. For many, a physical punishment was unavoidable. When you hear the words flogging or caning, your mind likely conjures a scene of brutal, chaotic violence. You imagine a grim-faced guard, a man of muscle and fury, wielding a heavy stick with uncontrolled rage. The victim is tied to a post, their back bared, and the blows rain down, a whirlwind of malice and pain, each strike meant to maim and terrorize. The sound is a sickening thud, the cries of the victim echoing in a public square. This is the glamorous illusion of punishment, raw, emotional, and terrifyingly simple. Now, let's peel back that gruesome veneer. The shocking reality of a judicial beating in the Song dynasty was that it was often as bound by regulations as the filing of a lawsuit. The procedure was stripped of passion and turned into a predictable, almost medical, administrative task. The instrument of this punishment was not just any stick. There were two officially sanctioned types, the light bamboo che and the heavy bamboos hang. The legal codes, those same dustitoms the clerks perpetually consulted, were incredibly specific about their construction. The light bamboo had to be a certain length, a certain thickness, and planed smooth to remove the knots, which could break the skin too easily. The heavy bamboo was thicker and longer, a more formidable tool for more serious offences. These were not improvised weapons. They were standardized government implements. When the magistrate sentences a man to, say, 20 strokes of the light bamboo, it sets in motion a rigid and formal process. The condemned is taken to the courtyard of the Yemen. He is not simply thrown to the ground. He is positioned in a specific way, often stretched over a board or held down by several runners. The man chosen to administer the beating is not a raging brute. He is a trained functionary, a Yemen runner whose job this is, and he is being watched, not just by the public, but by a supervising clerk. The clerk's job is not to gloat, but to count. He calls out the number of each stroke. 1, 2, 3. His voice is not filled with anger, but with the monotonous rhythm of a man taking inventory. This counting served a crucial purpose. It ensured that the sentence was carried out exactly as prescribed. The magistrate ordered 20 strokes, and 20 strokes must be delivered, no more, no less. The runner administering the beating was also under scrutiny. He was expected to deliver the blows with a certain rhythm and force enough to cause pain and leave significant bruising, but not so much as to cause a debilitating injury or, heaven forbid, death. If a prisoner died during a flogging, it would trigger a mandatory and deeply unwelcome investigation from the provincial authorities, creating a mountain of paperwork and a black mark on the magistrate's record. Thus, the goal was not to destroy the man, but to inflict a legally precise quantity of pain. It was a calibrated act. But why this obsession with regulating a beating? Why turn an act of violence into a piece of bureaucratic theatre? The answer lies in the Confucian principle of lie, or proper ritual and order, which permeated every aspect of Song society. Even punishment had to be orderly. The chaotic, emotional beating was seen as barbaric and beneath a sophisticated, civilized administration. A regulated, predictable punishment, however, reinforced the idea that the state's power was not arbitrary, but based on law and procedure. It demonstrated that the government was in control not only of its subjects, but of its own actions. Furthermore, this system acted as a check on the power of local magistrates. By standardizing the tools and procedures of punishment, the central government in Kaifeng could ensure that a sentence of 20 strokes meant roughly the same thing in a rural village as it did in the bustling capital. It prevented local officials from becoming petty tyrants who could dish out savage beatings on a whim. The process was so formalized that there were even rules about how to strike. The blows were to be confined to the buttocks and thighs, avoiding the more vulnerable back and spine. There were even stories, perhaps apocryphal, of runners who became so skilled that they could produce loud, terrifying slapping sounds and dramatic-looking welts without causing any deep tissue damage, a service that could be discreetly purchased by the family of the condemned. The entire affair was a demonstration. It was a performance of the law, a physical manifestation of the words written on that scroll in the clerk's office. The 20 bruises that would blossom on the man's skin were just as much a part of the official record as the ink on the paper, and for those awaiting trial or sentencing, their holding place was governed by a similar, if less painful, spirit of dull bureaucracy. Before the sentence of the regulated rattan, before the transactional mercy of a fine, there is the waiting. Your conception of an ancient Chinese prison is likely a product of dramatic fiction. You imagine a dungeon, a place of ultimate despair. The air is wet and cold, smelling of mildew and human misery. Water drips endlessly from a slimy stone ceiling. In the corner, a pile of filthy straw serves as a bed. Rats, bold and fat, scurry in the darkness. The prisoners are skeletal figures in rags, their limbs shackled with heavy, rusting iron, their groans and whimpers the only sound. This is the glamorous illusion of incarceration, a terrifying, subterranean world completely cut off from the light, a place of gothic horror and profound suffering. Now, let the light from a barred window cut through that gloom. The shocking reality of a typical Song Dynasty jail, or jieni, was often less about terrifying cruelty and more about boring, soul-crushing administrative neglect. It was not so much a dungeon of despair as it was a poorly managed and chronically underfunded holding centre, run with the same bureaucratic indifference as every other government department. You are not shackled in a private, dripping cell. You are herded into a large, communal room with dozens of other men. The air is thick and foul, not with the romantic scent of mildew, but with the mundane stench of unwashed bodies, stale sweat and overflowing latrine buckets. The greatest threat here is not the sadistic jailer from your imagination, but disease, dysentery and typhus, which spread like wildfire in such cramped, unsanitary conditions. The guards are not gleefully cruel torturers. They are low-paid yeoman runners, just as bored and miserable as the prisoners. Their main job is not to inflict pain, but to prevent escapes and fill out paperwork. They take roll call every morning and every evening, the clerk shouting out names from a list and ticking them off one by one. Lai Wei, here. Zhang Fan, here. It feels less like a prison and more like a grim parody of a school classroom. The primary interaction you have with the guards is not through violence, but through commerce. Everything has a price. Need a cleaner patch of floor to sleep on? That'll cost you a few copper coins. Want a slightly larger portion of the thin, watery rice gruel that serves as your meal? That requires a bribe. The jail is its own microeconomy, where the currency is whatever small trinkets or cash your family can smuggle into you. And why was the system like this? Why not the horrifying dungeon of legend? The answer is a familiar one. It was a matter of administrative and financial priorities. The Song state was a colossal enterprise, and its budget was always stretched thin. Building and maintaining elaborate, high-security dungeons was expensive. It was far cheaper to simply warehouse accused and convicted criminals in basic, overcrowded facilities. The primary purpose of the jail was not to punish, but to hold. It was a human storage facility for the legal system. Men were kept here while awaiting trial, or while their families tried to scrape together the money for a redemption payment, or while the paperwork for their banishment was being processed. Punishment was a separate administrative act: the caning, the fine, the tattoo that would happen later. The jail was simply the bureaucratic waiting room. This led to a strange and frustrating legal limbo. The law itself, in its meticulous way, recognized the danger of this system. Song legal codes actually stipulated that prisoners could not be held indefinitely. A magistrate who failed to hear a case and pass judgment within a specific time frame could himself face punishment, usually a demotion or a fine. This wasn't necessarily out of compassion for the prisoners. It was because an overflowing jail was an administrative failure. It represented a backlog of unresolved cases, a blot on the magistrate's record of efficiency. It was also a potential source of unrest. A prison riot, or a major outbreak of disease that killed dozens of inmates, would bring unwanted attention from higher authorities. Therefore, the pressure was always on to keep the cases moving, to process the human inventory, and to clear the books. So you sit in the crowded, stinking room, not tortured, but forgotten. You are a name on a list, a file in a cabinet, a body waiting to be processed. The greatest horror of the Song Dynasty jail is not sharp, sudden pain, but a slow, grinding decay of hope. Days blur into one another, marked only by the morning and evening roll calls. You listen to the coughs of the man next to you, wondering if he has the flux that is working its way through the cell. You worry that your family has forgotten you, or that the clerk has lost your paperwork. Your fate is not in the hands of a monster, but in the hands of a slow, inefficient and overwhelmed bureaucracy. And the man in charge of that bureaucracy, the magistrate himself, lives in mortal terror of that same system. We have spoken of the magistrate as a distant, powerful figure, the man who holds your fate in his hands. History and folklore have gifted us with a glamorous illusion of this character, We picture him as a brilliant detective, a Chinese Sherlock Holmes. Think of Judge Bao, the legendary Song official, his face a mask of stern integrity, his mind a razor-sharp instrument of justice. In these stories, he cleverly uncovers clues, masterfully cross-examines witnesses and exposes the guilty party in a dramatic courtroom reveal. He is a master of disguise, an incorruptible hero, a champion of the common man who can see the truth in a person's heart. His court is a theatre of wisdom and righteous power. Now, let us gently push open the door to his private study, late at night. The shocking reality is that the man you see is not a confident detective. He is a stressed-out administrator drowning in paperwork. His desk is a mountain of scrolls and reports. His back aches. His eyes are raw from reading endless lines of characters by the flickering light of a candle. The brilliant magistrate is less a detective and more a mid-level manager terrified of making a clerical error. His greatest fear is not that a guilty man might go free, but that a report he submits to his superiors will contain a procedural flaw, a wrongly cited statute or a logical inconsistency that could ruin his career. His entire professional existence is governed by a system of performance reviews as rigid as any modern corporation. For every case he adjudicates, he must write a detailed report justifying his decision. This report includes a summary of the accusation, the testimony, the physical evidence if any, and, most importantly, the exact legal statutes and precedents upon which his judgment is based. This document then travels up the chain of command, to the prefectural and provincial levels, where it is scrutinized by other, more senior bureaucrats. If they find an error, any error, the case can be sent back for retrial, and a demerit is placed on the magistrate's record. Too many demerits, and his chances for promotion are gone. A serious error could lead to his own demotion, a fine, or even banishment. Remember the official punishment of a demotion? Notice we hinted at. It's written with the very same ink. So why was the system designed to create such anxiety? Why turn judges into fearful paper pushers? It was the Song government's solution to the eternal problem of corruption and incompetence. By forcing every decision to be justified in writing and reviewed by multiple layers of bureaucracy, the system created a powerful mechanism of oversight. A magistrate in a remote province knew that his work was not final. It would be read and judged by his superiors in the capital, men he had never met. This paper trail was a check against laziness, bias and bribery. A magistrate who consistently made sloppy or unjust rulings would soon be identified and removed. The system wasn't designed to find brilliant detectives, it was designed to weed out bad administrators. It prized consistency, caution, and procedural correctness above all else. This created a legal culture that was profoundly conservative. A magistrate's safest path was to follow precedent strictly. If he was faced with a novel or ambiguous case, his first instinct was not to innovate, but to search the law books for a similar case from the past. His goal was to make a decision that was legally unassailable, even if it wasn't perfectly just. This is why he sighed when faced with your he said case about the trampled fence. It was a messy situation with no clear precedent, a procedural minefield. Offering you the chance to pay a fine was the cleanest, safest way to close the file and move on. It was an administratively sound solution. You see him there, rubbing his tired eyes, dipping his brush into his inkstone. He is not writing a verdict, he is crafting a defense of his own actions. Every character must be perfect. Every citation must be correct. He is not a hero fighting for truth. He is a bureaucrat trying to survive. His nemesis is not a cunning criminal, but a misplaced document or a poorly worded sentence. The great Judge Bao of legend was celebrated precisely because he was such a rare exception to the rule. The average magistrate was simply a man like this one, trapped in a web of his own making, a prisoner of the very paper trail he was tasked to create. And outside his office, a different kind of paper trail was forming a mountain of unheard pleas from people desperate for his attention. The magistrate in his study, a lonely figure battling his administrative anxieties, represents the formal channel of justice. If you have a grievance, you are supposed to go through him. The glamorous illusion of this system is one of access and fairness. You imagine that any citizen, no matter how humble, can have their day in court. Folklore and official histories love to tell stories of a poor widow or a wronged peasant who bravely bangs the great drum outside the yamen, demanding an audience. The just magistrate, hearing the call, immediately grants them entry, listens to their tale and rights the wrong that has been done to them. It's a beautiful, democratic ideal, justice available to all who seek it. But let's step away from the sound of that mythical drum and into the dusty, neglected archives of the Yamen. The shocking reality is that for every person who successfully got the magistrate's attention, there were hundreds, perhaps thousands, whose pleas were simply lost in the system. Your desperate appeal for justice was not a dramatic speech. It was a piece of paper. It was a petition. Scroll you, or a hired letter writer, had painstakingly composed, outlining your case. And what happened to that scroll? More often than not, it ended up here, in a room piled high with identical scrolls, drowning in a sea of silent, unanswered prayers. You hand your petition to a low-level clerk at the entrance of the government compound. He doesn't read it. He might not even be able to. He simply takes it, perhaps grunting in acknowledgement, and adds it to a large wicker basket already overflowing with similar documents. At the end of the day, that basket is carried to a records room. It is not a library. It is a warehouse. Scrolls are stacked on shelves, piled in corners and bundled together with twine. There is a system of organization, in theory. Petitions are supposed to be sorted by date and subject matter, but the clerks are overworked and underpaid. The sheer volume of incoming paper is overwhelming. A scroll might be put on the wrong shelf. It might slip behind a cabinet. It might be eaten by the very insects the expensive ink was supposed to deter. Why did this happen? Why create a system that invited petitions only to bury them in an avalanche of paperwork? It was the unintentional byproduct of the Song dynasty's own success and its core philosophy. The government, by centralizing power and promoting the idea that the emperor and by extension his officials was the ultimate arbiter of all disputes, had inadvertently created an insatiable demand for state-adjudicated justice. Everyone, from a farmer arguing over a fence line to a merchant disputing a contract, was encouraged to see the Yemen as the solution to their problems. This led to what historians call the litigation explosion. The magistrates' courts were flooded, not necessarily with major criminal cases, but with a deluge of minor civil disputes. The system simply couldn't cope. The single magistrate and his small staff of clerks were responsible for the administration of a whole county, which could contain tens of thousands of people. They had to collect taxes, maintain roads and canals, manage the census, and oversee public works. Adjudicating every single petty squabble was an impossible task. The petitions piled up, forming a physical monument to the gap between the ideal of justice and the reality of an overburdened bureaucracy. The magistrate, whom we saw stressed in his office, had to practice a brutal form of triage. He would only ever see a fraction of the petitions that arrived. His clerks would prescreen them, prioritizing cases that were politically important, involved significant amounts of money, or were filed by prominent local families. Your plea, a minor dispute with a neighbor, was likely to end up at the bottom of the pile, and eventually in the oblivion of the archive. So you wait. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months. You have no idea what is happening. There is no system for tracking your petition, no confirmation number, no customer service line to call. You are left in a state of anxious uncertainty. Your only hope is that your piece of paper will, by some miracle, make its way to the top of the right pile and land on the magistrate's desk at a moment when he is not too busy or too tired. You are not a victim of malice or corruption. You are a victim of volume. You have been defeated by the sheer success of the administrative state you were trying to engage. Your voice has not been silenced. It has simply been filed away. And this very same system of paper-based consequences applied not just to commoners, but to the officials themselves, whose own fates were just as precarious and just as dependent on the stroke of a brush. We've seen how the system processes commoners, with their fines, canings, and tattoos. But what about the men running the system itself? The glamorous illusion paints the scholar official as a figure of immense power and untouchable prestige. Draped in fine robes embroidered with symbols of his rank, he moves through society with an aura of authority. He is the intellectual elite, the master of classic texts, the embodiment of Confucian virtue. To be a successful official is to have won the lottery of life in Song China. Punishment, in our minds, is for the lower classes. Surely these esteemed gentlemen are above such crude measures. If they fall from grace, we imagine a dramatic, Shakespearean downfall, a forced suicide with a cup of poisoned wine presented on a black lacquer tray, or perhaps a secret execution in the dead of night to avoid public scandal. Now, let's pull back the curtain on this elite world. The shocking reality is that the most common and most feared punishment for a scholar official was something far more mundane, yet in its own way, just as devastating. It was not a cup of poison, but a piece of paper. It was a formal notice of demotion, written with the very same ink he used to sign his own judgments. An official's entire identity, his social standing, his income and his self-worth were all tied to his rank in the vast, hierarchical bureaucracy. A demotion was not just a professional setback, it was an act of social and personal annihilation. Imagine our magistrate, the one we saw labouring over his reports. Let's say he makes a serious error. Perhaps he mismanages the grain reserves, leading to a shortage. Or maybe a report he filed is found to have a critical legal flaw, embarrassing his superiors. The news travels up the chain of command, a flurry of accusing scrolls. The judgment comes back down from the capital, not with a team of imperial assassins, but via a government courier. The courier delivers a sealed document. The magistrate opens it, his hands trembling slightly. Inside is an edict. It's written in elegant calligraphy on high-quality paper, but its message is brutal. From the Department of Personnel, it begins by order of the Grand Chancellor. Your rank is hereby reduced from grade Savina to grade 8B. You are to be reassigned as the Deputy Assistant for Canal Maintenance in the southern prefecture of Chinju. The fall is swift and absolute. His fine silk robe with its silver pheasant badge of rank must be put away, replaced by the simpler garment of a lower-grade official. He loses a significant portion of his salary. He and his family must pack their belongings and move, not to a prestigious post, but to a provincial backwater. Inju is a humid, malaria-prone region thousands of miles from the sophisticated culture of the capital. Being the deputy assistant for canal maintenance is a meaningless job, a make-work position designed for disgraced officials. It's a paper pusher's exile. He will spend his days supervising illiterate labourers and filing tedious reports on silt levels. His brilliant mind, which once wrestled with the Confucian classics, now left to atrophy. His career is, in all likelihood, over. Why this particular form of punishment? Because it perfectly mirrored the values of the system itself. The scholar official's world was built on a ladder of prestigious appointments and examination degrees. Their entire lives were a quest for upward mobility within this paper-based hierarchy. Therefore, the most logical and painful punishment was to kick them back down that same ladder. It was a perfectly symmetrical act of administrative violence. This system of demotion and reassignment also served as a brilliant tool of political control for the emperor and his inner circle. It allowed them to neutralize rivals or remove incompetent officials without resorting to bloody purges, which could destabilize the government. It was a cleaner, more bureaucratic method of political warfare. An official could be rendered powerless not by killing him, but by simply reassigning him to a post where he had no influence. This administrative punishment was, in many ways, more terrifying than a physical threat. It was a living death. The demoted official was still alive, but his social identity was gone. His friends in the capital would shun him, afraid of being associated with his failure. His name would become a cautionary tale for ambitious young scholars. He was a ghost in the machine, a constant reminder that the same system that bestowed immense privilege could also withdraw it with the stroke of a brush. The ink that had been the source of his power and prestige had now become the instrument of his disgrace. And while his punishment was one of paper and position, he could at least be grateful that the more ancient, more brutal forms of punishment he read about in the history books were now mostly ghosts themselves. As our demoted official packs his belongings for his miserable new post, he might console himself by reading the classics. He would thumb through ancient scrolls describing the legal systems of past dynasties. In these texts, he would encounter the legendary 5 punishments, a system of corporal mutilation that haunted the Chinese legal imagination for centuries. The glamorous illusion, perpetuated by these old tales, is one of terrifying, visceral justice. The 5 punishments were a symphony of horror, tattooing the face, which we've seen the song Dynasty adapt. But then came E, cutting off the nose, U, amputating one or both feet, Ing, castration for men or seclusion for women, and finally, T, the death penalty, often by gruesome means like slicing or boiling. This was the stuff of nightmares, a vision of justice as pure, unadulterated bodily destruction. Now, let's step into an actual Song Dynasty courtroom with our anxious magistrate presiding. A man has been convicted of a serious theft. According to the ancient laws on the scrolls, the appropriate punishment would be the amputation of a foot. The shocked reality, however, is that the magistrate would never even consider such a sentence. He would likely be more horrified by the thought of ordering it than the criminal would be of receiving it. In the Song Dynasty, the classical 5 punishments existed more as ghosts in the legal code than as actual practice in the courtroom. They were revered historical concepts, not a practical guide to sentencing. The magistrate, a man of refined Confucian learning, would view such mutilations as barbaric, the crude methods of a less civilized age. The Song elite saw their dynasty as the pinnacle of culture and reason. They had replaced the chaos of the sword with the order of the brush. Hacking off limbs was messy, emotional, and, worst of all, disorderly. It went against the very grain of their bureaucratic, administrative mindset. Instead of amputating the thief's foot, the magistrate would consult his well-worn law book's contemporary Song legal code, not the ancient classics. This code had systematically replaced the old punishments with a more rational, graduated scale of penalties. This new system was primarily based on two things we have already discussed at length: beatings with the light or heavy bamboo and periods of exile or penal servitude. The ancient punishment of foot amputation, for example, was formally replaced with a sentence of a severe flogging followed by banishment to a remote military garrison for life. Castration was almost never used as a judicial punishment, having been replaced by the death penalty for the most heinous crimes or by lifelong penal servitude. The only one of the original 5 punishments that remained in regular use was the first, tattooing the face, and even that, as we saw, had been transformed from a simple mark of shame into a sophisticated administrative tool, a permanent ID card. So why keep the old 5 punishments in the law books at all? Why have them looming like ghosts in the background? Their presence served a powerful ideological purpose. By maintaining the idea of these terrifying ancient penalties, the Song state could project an image of fearsome authority while simultaneously congratulating itself on its own humanity and reasonableness. The message was, we could cut off your foot for this crime, as our ancestors did. But because we are a benevolent and enlightened dynasty, we will instead sentence you to a beating and 3 years of penal servitude. 500 lie away. It made the actual punishment seem merciful, by comparison. It was a classic rhetorical trick, creating a horrifying baseline so that the reality seemed far more palatable. It allowed the officials to feel both powerful and compassionate at the same time. This evolution shows the core of the Song legal identity. They were not revolutionaries seeking to tear down the past, but reformers seeking to rationalize it. They didn't discard the ancient framework, they hollowed it out and filled it with their own bureaucratic logic. The names of the old punishments were sometimes even recycled. A sentence might be formally recorded as commuted from foot amputation to life servitude, giving the verdict a gravitas and historical continuity it wouldn't otherwise possess. The entire system was a masterpiece of administrative substitution. Ain was replaced with paperwork. Mutilation was replaced with management. But while the state had largely abandoned the practice of mutilating the body, it held in reserve an even more terrifying power, a punishment that didn't just attack the flesh, but sought to annihilate a person's very existence in the record of humanity. We have seen the state's power to control the body through regulated beatings, to manage identity with tattoos, and to dictate location through administrative exile. We have seen it shame officials with demotion. In all these cases, however, the individual, though punished, still exists. They are a name in a ledger, a body in a cell, a file on a shelf. The ultimate punishment, you might assume, is death. The glamorous illusion of capital punishment is its finality, the swing of the executioner's sword, the tightening of the silken cord. It is the absolute end, the moment the state exerts its final power over the physical self. It's dramatic, fearsome, and absolute. But in the intricate, paper-obsessed world of the Song dynasty, there was a punishment that, for many, was considered even more terrifying than death. The shocking reality is that the most profound penalty was not the destruction of the body, but the obliteration of one's identity from the official record. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of being erased from existence. For a person in Song China, your identity was not a purely personal, internal concept. It was defined by your relationships, specifically your place within your family and lineage. Your name was not just your own, it belonged to your ancestors and your descendants. The family register, the Zupu, was a sacred document, a meticulously maintained scroll that recorded the genealogical history of your clan, sometimes for centuries. To be part of this record was to be part of an unbroken chain stretching back into the past and reaching forward into the future. It was the source of your social standing, your eligibility for marriage, and your right to be honored after death through ancestral rites. It was, in a very real sense, your soul made manifest on paper. For the most heinous crimes, particularly treason or offences against the emperor, the state could inflict a punishment that struck at the very heart of this system. It was the penalty of having your name officially struck from your family's records. Imagine the scene. It is not violent. no blood is shed. The head of your clan, your father or grandfather, is summoned by the magistrate. He is ordered to unroll the precious, silk-bound family scroll. The magistrate's clerk, our recurring friend with the ink-stained fingers, takes up his brush. He finds your name in the genealogical chart, and then, with a single, deliberate stroke of black ink, he cancels it out. Sometimes, a formal annotation would be added, erased by imperial decree for the crime of in that moment you cease to exist in the one context that truly matters. Why was this considered so devastating? It was a punishment that transcended death. An executed criminal could still be remembered by his family. His spirit could still be placated with offerings at the ancestral altar, but a man erased from the register was made a non-person. He became a ghost while still alive. His children were no longer his. His connection to his ancestors was severed. He had no past and no future. He was denied the fundamental right of a Confucian human being, a place in the social fabric. For his family, it was a profound act of shame and sorrow, a wound in their lineage that could never be healed. They were forced to become complicit in his damnation, to officially disown their own flesh and blood. This punishment reveals the ultimate source of power in the Song worldview. It was not physical force, but administrative authority. The state's ability to define and undefine a person's identity was its most potent weapon. By controlling the records, census rolls, the tax ledgers, and, by extension, even the sacred family registers, a government-controlled reality itself. A man could be standing right in front of you, breathing and speaking, but if the official record said he did not exist, then in a crucial, social sense he didn't. This was the logical extreme of the system we have been exploring all night. If your life begins as an entry on a piece of paper in the Yamen, then it can also be ended by an edit on that same paper. It was the bureaucratic death penalty. This penalty was reserved for the most severe offences against the state, crimes that threatened the very order the bureaucracy was designed to protect. It was a clean, quiet, and devastatingly effective way to make an example of someone. It warned others that defiance against the emperor was not just a risk to their life, but to their very soul and the continuity of their entire line. It was the ultimate demonstration that the state, with its brushes and its ink and its endless scrolls, was supreme. And for those crimes that directly threatened the emperor's life or the stability of the dynasty, the state was willing to abandon its beloved bureaucratic niceties and unleash a terrifying, streamlined efficiency. Throughout our journey, we focused on the slow, grinding, and surprisingly ordinary nature of Song dynasty justice. We've seen a system obsessed with paperwork, procedure, and precedent. It's a world of regulations, redemption fees, and administrative reassignments. The glamorous illusion of swift, bloody justice has been consistently replaced by the reality of a cautious, risk-averse bureaucracy. It seems as though the entire state is designed to slow things down, to filter all human conflict through layers of ink and paper. You might begin to feel that the system was, for all its flaws, fundamentally gentle, preferring a fine to a flogging, and a demotion to a death sentence. But there were lines. And when those lines were crossed, the bureaucratic machine was thrown aside, revealing the terrifying, raw power it was designed to conceal. For the ultimate crime-shy treason, plotting to overthrow the emperor or leading an armed rebellion, the shocking reality is that the meticulous legal codes were suddenly and ruthlessly ignored. The ink, which had been so carefully used to record, regulate, and manage, was now spilled in a torrent of red. The state, for a moment, took off its scholar's robe and revealed the warrior beneath. Imagine a group of conspirators has been discovered, men who plotted to assassinate the emperor and place a new claimant on the throne. There is no slow, methodical filing of a complaint. There is no summons to the Yemen. The arrest is swift and violent, carried out not by bumbling local runners, but by the elite palace guard or the dreaded secret police who answered only to the emperor. The prisoners are not taken to the local jail to await trial. They are taken to a special high-security prison within the capital, a place where the usual rules do not apply. There is no talk of redemption fees. There is no carefully regulated beating. Torture, which was officially discouraged and regulated for ordinary crimes, is now employed systematically and brutally to extract confessions and, more importantly, the names of other conspirators. The trial, if one is held at all, is a mere formality. It is not presided over by a cautious local magistrate, but by a high-powered commission of the emperor's most trusted ministers. They are not interested in legal precedent or procedural correctness. Their goal is not justice. It is extermination. They need to eliminate the threat quickly and make an example that will terrify anyone else who might harbour similar ambitions. The verdict is a foregone conclusion. The sentence is death. but not the relatively clean, swift death prescribed for common murderers. For treason, the punishment was often lynching, the so-called death by 1,000 cuts, a gruesome, theatrical execution designed to maximize suffering and public terror. And why this sudden, dramatic shift from cautious bureaucracy to brutal efficiency? The answer is that the entire administrative legal system we have been describing was designed to do one thing: preserve the stability of the dynasty and the sacred authority of the emperor. It was a buffer, a complex shock absorber for handling the everyday frictions of society. But when a threat emerged that targeted the very heart of that power, the buffer was no longer needed. The system was designed to protect the emperor, not to constrain him. In moments of existential threat, the law became what the emperor needed it to be. The cautious rules and regulations were a luxury afforded by peace and stability. Treason was a declaration of war against the state, and the state responded in kind. This brutal response often extended beyond the conspirators themselves. The principle of clan extermination though applied less frequently and with more nuance than in earlier dynasties, was still a terrifying possibility. For the most severe cases of treason, not only the primary conspirator, but also his parents, siblings, and children could be executed. The goal was to rip the threat out by its roots, to erase the entire lineage so that no son could grow up to avenge his father. This was the ultimate failure of the bureaucratic ideal. It was an admission that in the final analysis, the state's power rested not on the legitimacy of its paperwork, but on its monopoly on overwhelming, terrifying violence. The quiet, ink-scented Yemen and the blood-soaked execution ground were two sides of the same coin, one used to manage the populace, the other to terrorize it. And once the crisis passed and the threat was eliminated, the scholar's robe was put back on, the ink was carefully ground once more, and the slow, methodical work of administration resumed. The memory of that red spill, however, would linger, a stark reminder of the power that lay dormant behind the paper-thin walls of the bureaucracy. And the legacy of that bureaucracy, its methods and its mindset, would far outlast the dynasty itself. The blood from the swift, brutal punishment of the traitors has been washed from the execution ground. The crisis has passed. The emperor is secure. And the bureaucracy, having been momentarily bypassed, resumes its slow, inexorable rhythm. The clerks return to their desks, the scent of pine soot ink once again overpowering the metallic tang of fear. The demoted official settles into his miserable provincial post, counting the days. The tattooed man serves his time in a remote garrison, his face a permanent record of his past. The system, having proven its ultimate power, settles back into its comfortable, everyday function of managing, counting, and recording. The Song dynasty itself, for all its administrative genius, eventually crumbled. It was weakened by internal politics and worn down by the constant threat of powerful nomadic empires from the north. First the Jurchens and then, decisively, the Mongols swept away the armies of the scholar officials. The glamorous illusion is that of a catastrophic and the dramatic fall of a capital city, the last Song emperor casting himself into the sea rather than face capture. It's an ending of fire and fury, the definitive collapse of a world. But the shocking reality is that while the dynasty fell, the system it perfected did not. The scrolls, the clerks, the obsession with paperwork, the very ink-scented soul of the Song state that was a ghost that could not be exorcised. The Mongol conquerors, who founded the Yuan dynasty, were warriors, not administrators. They knew how to conquer an empire, but they had little idea how to govern one as vast and complex as China. They quickly realized that they could not rule their new domain from the saddle. They needed to collect taxes, maintain order, and manage the population. And so, grudgingly at first, and then with increasing reliance, they adopted the very bureaucratic machinery of the dynasty they had just destroyed. They kept the local Yemen offices. They employed Chinese clerks who knew how to maintain the census rolls and land registries. The language of the documents might change, but the forms, the procedures, and the reliance on a paper trail remained. The enduring weight of a Song dynasty scroll proved, in the end, to be heavier than a Mongol sword. This pattern repeated itself. The Ming dynasty, which overthrew the Mongols and restored native Chinese rule, consciously and explicitly modeled its government on the Song blueprint, refining the civil service examinations and expanding the bureaucracy. The Qing dynasty, established by Manchu invaders, likewise inherited and utilized this powerful administrative engine. The punishments evolved, of course. Some became harsher, some more lenient. But the fundamental principle established by the Song that true power lies in the control of information, that justice is an administrative process, and that every human life can be reduced to an entry in a ledger. This idea endured for 1,000 years. The quiet clerk with his brush and inkstone outlasted them all. The system was just too useful to discard. So as our journey through the surprisingly ordinary punishments of the Song dynasty comes to a close, we are left with this final, quiet truth. The real legacy of the Song was not its beautiful paintings or its delicate porcelain, but its creation of a government of paper. It was a system that could be terrifying in its cold indifference, reducing human lives to case files and shame to a calculated weight. It could be frustratingly slow, burying pleas for justice under a mountain of its own paperwork. And it could be brutally efficient when it felt its own existence was threatened. But it was, above all, a system. An orderly, rational, and enduring machine for managing people. It was a government that smelled of ink. And that scent, that dry, earthy, and powerful fragrance of bureaucratic control, would linger in the halls of power in China for centuries to come, a permanent stain on the scroll of history. Now, as the story fades, allow your own mind to drift. Let the details of the scrolls and the inkstones soften at the edges. The world of the Song dynasty, with its rules and its records, recedes into the quiet library of the past. The weight of the Khmer is lifted from your shoulders. The sting of the rattan fades into a distant memory. The anxieties of the magistrate are not yours to bear. You are left only with the gentle quiet of your own room, the soft hum of the fan, the comfortable weight of your blanket. The endless paperwork of the past has been filed away, and there is nothing left for you to do now. No forms to fill out, no judgments to await. There is only this moment of peace, this gentle slide into stillness. Let the rhythm of your breathing be the only procedure that matters, a slow and steady count that carries you away from the waking world and into the soft, unwritten pages of your dreams. All the stories have been told for tonight. All the records are complete. It is time to rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.